And what I wanted to do, and this was a combination of our decisions from ASQ as well as, a second, I got to find the right screen and the right thing to put up here. So I got to do this. I have to do that. And you should. Okay, so we hear a little bit of somebody talking in the background. So what we wanted to do here today was really to have a conversation. I've prepared some slides that'll help us deal with everything, but we talked about a couple of different topics that might be pertinent. And one of them, of course, is one of my favorites, which is governance does not have to be a four-letter word. But we decided that, in fact, we really want to chat more around the concepts of removing friction from processes. And one of the ways of doing that, of course, is starting to eliminate emails as we can as we go forward. And you have to ask yourself, so how big a factor are emails, in fact, as we deal with something? So one of the things that I've done a little bit of research on, and I had to update the slide today because I had a slide here that said that 23% of an employee's workday was consumed by emails. Now, mind you, like all statistics, 75% of them are made up. This is a combination of statistics that come from our friends at Adobe. They do an annual survey to see what's what. So some of you may spend more time and some of you may spend less time on emails, but on average, they find that the knowledge workers spend somewhere around 28% of a workday addressing emails. And one of the things that we've discovered over time is that while many of us like to think we're good at multitasking and being able to move from one topic to another with some kind of rapidity, we also discover that in multitasking, we take 10 to 15 seconds to recover back to what it is that we are actually supposed to be dealing with when we're interrupted by a colleague or a phone call or an email that comes in. And I did notice quite a bit in the office where I was working that there were a lot of people who felt an immediate need to respond to an email as opposed to saying, I'm going to address emails as a concentrated section of work. So, you might put aside a half hour or an hour a day or something like that, or 2 or 3 times in a day in order to be able to do it. So these things tend to be invasive in nature. And so one of the things that we'd like to talk about tonight, and I'm hoping that all of you here will share your stories as well, be they positive or negative. We'll take all stories coming in as to some of the issues that you might run into and some of the difficulties that you have. And so we'll just move on into the next slide. One of the reasons that we've discovered over time that people don't really act about this is, well, it's part of the process. It belonged to somebody else. It's not my job to address that issue. Or my personal favorite has always been either we've always done it this way, and then that person talks about continuous improvement, or we get into things like Sarbanes-Oxley or GDPR required or something along those lines, tell us that we have some requirements as to why we must have inserted into our processes emails, which are either for approval or notifications or however it is that you have structured those as we go forward. So again, most of us inherit our processes, and they typically, if they've been around for some period of time, I know that we started inserting emails into processes in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when I was working up in Minneapolis. And at that time, it was a huge time saver because we actually recovered time that we previously had lost in waiting for a fax to come through or something along those lines. And the email gave us an opportunity to have a broader distribution and to ensure that we could, as a result of that broader distribution, perhaps have a variety of people who could act at one time on a given request or demand as we went forward. The other problem is that we've designed some of these with these email steps in there or shared mailbox, which then asks for the first person on a team who actually comes in to be able to address whatever needs to be done. And then finally, one of the bigger problems that we run into when we think about these types of activities is that most of us don't really feel empowered to be able to make suggestions on how to streamline a process. Now, I don't know if that's true for you, Steve, or Terry, or Larry, but what we have found is that a lot of companies, employees don't really feel empowered to be able to talk about how might I be able to improve this process. Now, if any of you have good stories to help us understand why we would be improved as a result of this, or how we might have been able to improve processes as we went forward, I'm more than happy to listen to those and learn from you, because it's always an opportunity to do something a little bit better. So one of the areas that we often would look at would be to say, in order to try to eliminate any kind of emails or approvals or whatever interim steps, we want to start with the why. Why is it that we're actually doing something? What requires us to add this step or steps into an email process flow, or I'm sorry, into a process flow of some kind? I heard a story today from a former colleague that they have one process that has 15 emails that are sent out to different individuals, and then one broadcast email that goes out to 20 different people as an integrated part of getting approval on a new chemical composition to be part of their, I'm not even sure what they call it anymore. Used to be the MSD documents, right? So the material safety documents. And if you start thinking about that, that's an awful lot of traffic that goes through their system, which could include some binding of the system and so forth, but it's also very disruptive to a whole bunch of people that are out there as they deal with it. So one of the things that we want to take a look is to make sure that when you deal with emails and with other process activities, that you look at the activity from end to end. We typically would look at it from the beginning all the way through the end, as opposed to trying to sub-optimize a given part of a process. So just because there's an email in the middle doesn't mean that it itself is bad. It simply needs to be reviewed as to the challenge of the day, right? Is every step, is it required, and does it add value? And if it adds value, then we have to think about it from a perspective of, is there another better way that we could actually add value than an email, which is a start and stop and tends to be a breaking point where a process flow stops for some period of time. Now, in some organizations, like when I used to work at Lexmark, a lot of those emails get answered in some form or fashion during a 24-hour period, because we had employees around the world, and you often had order entry people who might have been in the Philippines as well as in Eastern Europe, that might be able to address things on a more of a flow basis. But no matter what, there was still some kind of interruption. And at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do with any of our processes is to reduce or eliminate friction points. And a friction point is going to be any time or any activity that tends to batch things together or tends to require approvals, and that also then requires some person to take an action as opposed to allowing an order to flow through. In your own personal world, you might go out to order something from Amazon. You can do that online. It remembers who you are and what your address is, although it gives you a chance to change the address. You can pick a payment method. It validates the credit card and does all of that as part of a flow that goes through. So from a corporate perspective, why do we need to have an interference or a blockage that might come about because of credit review? You might have a company that uses Dun & Bradstreet or some other type of credit review process. And if the business rules are structured in such a way that you can integrate those, and we'll talk about that here shortly, you may find that you could eliminate approvals or reduce the total number of approvals for something that needs to go through. One of my favorite stories from Lexmark was there was an application for a piece of CAD and PLM software that required something like 18 signatures. And I always was amused by that because it only took 5 signatures to spend $2 million of the company's time and effort, but it took 18 signatures to get somebody access to this appropriate piece of software. You have to ask yourself, where was the real value in that? So I would come back and suggest that you want to question everything. And why are we performing any of these given steps, right? Why are we processing things in this order? Why are we handing off from one department to another department? And where are friction points, right? So handoffs, delays, batches, those types of things. And Dave McGee, your organization isn't immune to that, right? If you think about the student registration experience or the student admission experience, we know that those all have batch modes, they have handoffs, they have all kinds of approvals that need to go through, and including registration for classes. Has there been any effort at BCTC to reduce that and to improve that process flow?
Yeah, actually, what they've been doing for a number of years, and they're getting better at actually making it happen, is they called at one point one-stop shop, but it's to make sure a prospective student can come in, talk to advising, financial aid, and get it all kind of done all at once, as opposed to having to wait in line for each of those things. A couple other things that they've just recently, what we've done is when we substitute one class for what would normally be taken, it was a big process. They had to go through a lot of different signatures. And what they did with that was they actually put it online, and I can type in a substitution, and then everybody on the list gets notified as it goes through the process. And they go on to the one document, give their approval, or if there's a problem, send it back. So we're doing a couple of things like that, which we're trying to streamline them.
Okay, great. So I know that other universities are engaged in similar type of activities to try to make it easier to transfer in or to be admitted or anything of that nature. And that's a big help because it becomes less frustrating. I can tell you that, I'm sorry, Emma or Terry, did you have something you wanted to say? No? Okay. I can tell you as a recent retiree, a very frustrating thing is applying for Medicare, Social Security, and all the other things that go along with it. Everything is in absolute batch mode. It's like the old days of insurance. You may remember that back in the bad old days of the 60s, 70s, and so forth, everything was done by date. And so every day's mail would be put into a basket, and then it would be processed as they were able to get through. Well, sometimes those would take weeks or months to be able to be sorted through and gotten to. And in many ways, we're seeing that, I can tell you that from my experience with Medicare and Social Security, that we see still some of that, even though it is automated now in terms of being on computers. So one of the things that we want to do, and this is no different whether it's lean or something that you do through any of the other programs like Plan, Do, Check, Act, or Six Sigma, is we want to try to get rid of any kinds of extra steps and duplicity of effort. And so typically those are things like approvals, reviews, and wait time. So at the bottom of the slide here, I put in some thoughts that had come from a variety of people and part of what the work was that I was engaged in previously. And one of those big ones is the concept of guardrails. A lot of times we needed approvals for something because a business rule was so complex or so narrow that any exception from the perceived norm required extraordinary steps, additional approvals, reviews, and things of that nature. So if we are able to have guardrails that are a little bit broader, that allow you more room for typical business activities, you may find that you have a beneficial process flow as opposed to a more restricted one when you have hard rules. But we also need to be clear that you have to have business rules that actually make sense and work for the company. There are going to be things like credit ratings. There are going to be things like other financial considerations or shipping considerations that need to be taken into account as you go through. An example of a clear business rule as opposed to a hard and fast rule, I was working for a company out in Minneapolis where every customer had a custom credit rating. And that custom credit rating determined what number of products and value of products they could purchase in any given time frame. And then, of course, based on payments received, renew some of the flow that they had there. And what we discovered is that this custom work was a huge hindrance to process flow, because since every customer had a custom rate, it meant that every one of them had to be touched every time you did something. So what we did is we worked with the finance department to come back through and take a look and say, let's put these people into some kind of band, right? So we had those people who had $1 million or more of credit capability, and that would have been a small group. And then we had other lesser break levels that could be applied to different organizations based upon their credit worthiness through D&B or through what our company's experience had been. And by putting people into these buckets, it meant that every order that came through did not get stopped for a review by finance as to whether it was acceptable or not. We found that they were approving in the high 90s percent of the orders that came through. And so this was just pure redundant work. And this was a case where most of that work was done by email, because the order would be stopped. An email would be sent to finance. Can you please clear this? The email would come back. It's now cleared. Go ahead and process the order. Two huge disruptions to the activities that had to be undertaken by the organization. Also, you benefit in doing things like that group effort or the pooling of credit ratings or whatever other activities you're undertaking by removing the handoffs that go from one person to another. Because the business rule was in place through a guardrail that was encompassing for a certain type of group, it meant that orders were able to flow through quite quickly. We had a similar situation with the same company in Minneapolis, where about 40% of the sales orders that came in were stopped because there was a problem. Either a product ID number or description was not correct. And what we discovered was that over time, the organization had not only made some changes themselves to their product numbering scheme, to their product description scheme, but some customers had also assigned a given product code to our product code so that there had to be a cross-reference. And so by creating a robust cross-reference that could be both customer specific, as well as enable the updates that we had previously done, we were able to reduce that 40% of error rate down into the low single digits. But more than that, we eliminated all of the emails that went back and forth where you'd have to email the customer and say, okay, this is what you said. Is this what you mean? They'd come back and say, no, what we really mean is this other item that you're talking about. And there was a lot of back and forth that terribly slowed things down. And so this was a great opportunity to eliminate emails and to eliminate frustrations within the order management and to process flows quickly. Because what we also then did was work with our shipping organization so that if you ordered by 2 p.m. on a given day, anything that was in inventory was able to be shipped that same day. So we improved customer service as a result as well. John, you may have seen some of this in your automotive history as well, right? Where a lot of times you can eliminate those intermediate emails and other processes to improve the flow of product to get to your customers on time. So the other thing that we found was that a lot of times we don't appreciate completely what it is that's involved in a given process. And so we want to visualize the process. And there's a couple of ways that you can visualize it. You know, one part would be to have a good process flow diagram that would show that information to you. Others are, in some companies, they might have well-documented processes that are clear enough without a visual flow. But then let's do this. Let's make sure we go back and take a look. Are these things, do they look right? Does it feel correct? Is it simple? Now, I got to be honest. I'm a huge fan of semicolons and run-on sentences. And what I discovered over time was that I could create the most complex sentence that I wanted to. And the more complex it was, the less likely it was that anybody in the audience would understand what it was that I was trying to say. So clarity comes from simplicity to a large extent. And you want to make things as simple as possible, but not any more simple than it needs to be. But simple and straightforward would be two areas that you might want to look at any one of your processes and talk about that. Have we made it as simple as possible? And then the other one would be to experience the process from the customer's perspective. That's outside in types of thinking. And the net result of that is we may realize that what appears to be clear to us, either through a numbering scheme or order management process, or an approval process to an email box or something of that nature, may not be as clear as it is to our customer. So one of the difficulties that we often see is our customer may be ordering from 5 or 10 or 20 different companies like ourselves, and each one of them has a different approach and a different way of identifying the information. And so that makes it harder and then creates additional opportunities for error and additional opportunities for emails that are impediments to the flow working as quickly as possible. And in the case of manufacturing, assembly, and distribution, can you walk those processes? Are you able to go out onto the factory floor or the distribution floor and actually visualize and experience what it is that people are actually going through? One of the things that we try to do with this visualization is to find out and highlight what are the blocks to flows, which include our inboxes, approvals, dwell or wait times. Those are all impediments to flowing through. So process visualization is a big advantage. So there's different tools that you can use to do this, right? I mean, people have used Legos, paper, cardboard cutouts, game boards. There's all kinds of different things that you can do. And I wouldn't be prescriptive at all here. The key would be for you and your organization to use the right tool to be able to eliminate those impediments to flow. So if you think about it, how many times do you get an email from a customer asking for a change in an order or a clarification or something of that nature? Each one of those is an opportunity to improve your process flow by making sure that if they're asking for a clarification, there may be an opportunity to provide a knowledge base. There may be an opportunity to make your product catalog or your engineering specifications clearer for that customer or a group of customers. Where you require an approval for something, and there are times when you have to, right? I mean, a custom product is going to require some kind of approval process as you go through. But again, there are ways using software to eliminate the approval process through emails and integrate it into the software itself. At Lexmark, for example, when they go to create new packaging, the packaging engineer sends a file or actually a notification that a file is available for the packaging company to access to be able to design their own packaging information and then return all of that to the engineer for approvals on the Lexmark side. That used to be done through hard copies. It used to be done through emails and so forth. And in today's world, they're able to do all of that using purely software and having eliminated emails and email boxes that may be ignored. Or worse, you go away on holiday and you haven't delegated someone to take over all of your activities, you'll discover that things can pile up. And so that's completely been eliminated now by being able to integrate things with software as opposed to using an older technology like email. The next thing that we want to talk about is how do we take a look and see how we eliminate our friction points, our loops and rework that has to be done. And some of that is very clearly done simply by getting it right the first time. So we're trying to poke a yoke or error-proof the process in the first place. In my past work as an enterprise architect, we often could take a look at the number of emails that went back and forth and the lack of clarity in a subject matter line. How about the number of times that emails contain more than one topic and therefore could generate multiple responses? There's also the fact that you may not be able to fully appreciate or understand the problem simply from a text email or one that's written in a form of language that's unfamiliar to you. So by trying to eliminate those friction points and the loops that you have, we found that we could make business processes work better the first time out. And wherever we were able to error-proof things, we then were able to take a look at something and say, we are able perhaps to automate some of the things that are currently being done via email or other methods in order to ensure the flow of the process. And then for some of us who've been working for quite some time, we may remember that everything in computers had to be done in batch modes. And in today's world, because of the power of processing speeds, as well as the capabilities that are available today in the cloud, we can find that we might be far better off by flowing every transaction as part of the flow, as opposed to batching them up and then running them in batches. Now, there may be cases where you're not able to do that, but we want to at least then perform them frequently as opposed to long-term batches as we go forward. So in order to automate, and recently this process automation move that's been ongoing with a lot of different companies, one of the problems that they ran into is they frequently tried to automate processes that hadn't been previously simplified and made, I like to say more better, but let's say something that flows more appropriately as you go through. And so part of that automation would be to eliminate notification emails, approval emails, and things of that nature. But one of the things that we want to do is we want to remove those friction points, as we said before, right? So clear business rules that can be addressed programmatically. That means that they need to be clear, they need to be simple, straightforward, and repeatable. So repeatable goes back to that guardrail concept, where I may have to have a guardrail that says if you're between A and H, we perform this task, and if we're between J and M, we're going to perform that task, so forth and so on. So that would be one way that you'd want to be able to take care of it. The other one is you want to make sure that you reduce as much as possible the total number of steps. And we want to make each step simple because we may be able to reuse that step in another process as well. You may remember that there were times when we would go to work and we might have 10 or 15 or 20 different logins. And now most companies have been able to get you to a point where, for the most part, you're using a single sign-on. Well, part of that is the simplification around logging into an application. It used to be that every application insisted that they had to have their own way of doing that. But today, that same type of organization might come back and say, rather than do this as a separate, let's subscribe to the Microsoft's Active Directory or to some other kind of logging and credentialing type of application, which provides some greater simplification for your processes as you go through. We want to look at trying to automate things that are lookups like credit flow and other types of product lookups that might exist in your order processing, so that as the order is being looked at line by the computer system, it's able to find out, yes, this person has appropriate credit. No, they're not part of the denied parties list. So that means that we are able to accept the order. Yes, we have the product in stock, and so we can move forward to shipping. All of that can be done through process automation if it has been sufficiently defined and simplified as we go through. And you'll note that each one of those things eliminates completely the need for some kind of email to put things in perspective with a customer or within our own organization. Because if you're leveraging what your ERP and your sales programs and so forth and so on can do, they can provide either dashboards or the automation of the work so that the only time you actually see something would be at the distribution center that might have to pack and ship. And then we want to be sure that we have frequent uploads in case you do have something that is batch oriented. And so that's something where in the past, we might have run a batch every hour or every 6 hours. And today you might run a batch every minute or every 3 minutes as you go through. So that's what I had for tonight for a concept. We want to first simplify. We want to remove our friction points, and our friction points are any time that a customer has to communicate with us, or we have to communicate with a customer or a supplier and typically that's done through emails these days, although I've seen some lately where there's more SMS, texting, and some of those other types of online activities that take place. But every one of those is an impediment to your being able to flow more work through your organization with less effort. So what I'd be interested now is to find out from anybody on the phone, are there impediments within your organization that, or you feel that there are impediments within your organization that is something that allows people or causes some grief and aggravation? So I see I've got one comment here, customer changing parts ordered day of shipment. Yeah, that's a huge one, right? Changing quantities all require interaction with both those and without emails. So that's absolutely, you may be right. There is no doubt that within a given organization, you will never eliminate 100% of emails. And frankly, emails may be better for you than a phone conversation, right? There could be time zone differences. There could be other issues that are that crop up there. The other time that you might argue that it would be a benefit to an email is you can copy multiple people, right? So if a customer is changing a part order, they may be able to say, okay, I'm going to send the email to order management, but I need to send it to distribution and other people as well in order to be able to communicate that as we go forward. Let's see here. PC shipping, PC scheduling, machine team leader, et cetera, find the raw material. You need to meet customer needs, transfer knowledge between groups, et cetera, et cetera. Would you like to help me understand a little bit more of that, Steve?
The 10 o'clock in the morning, the truck's arriving at 11, customer wants to change the load. Do we have the material? Can we process the material? You have to communicate with all of these people in all of these different groups. And I am not aware of a system that we have that's as effective as email, because Skype is very cumbersome. Teams is glitchy. Zooms is overkill. WhatsApp is maybe not allowed in some parts of the organization. And the system IM won't work with the people on the line because you have to walk your ass out to the floor and talk to them, which is the problem. So this is not an abnormal occurrence. With a small group of 60 customers shipping to maybe 100 different ship tos, this is normal. And I don't see how email can be eliminated, particularly in a distributed office that we have today, where you can't just walk over and talk to anybody in the first place. And you have to, now, what I do think we should consider is who's on the copy line. Because right now, you may really need to only talk to 2 or 3 people, but the people you're talking to prefer that you send it to a group like PC shipping and PC scheduling. So now you got 10 people that are getting emails. and the warehouse might have 3 or 4. So right now you've got 15 and you really only wanted to talk to 3 people. So since this occurs, let's say 20, maybe 20 times a day or so, how do we streamline, how do we focus on how to streamline the system while getting everyone's support that they don't have to be a part of it?
All
that's
right.
That's what I'm looking at.
Okay, so let's start off with the fact that it's fairly straightforward for me as an architect or as a consultant, which was my prior life, to come in and give you something that says, let's eliminate as many emails as we possibly can. Remember, I said make it as simple, but no simpler than it needs to be. So there's no doubt that in the absence of another form of technology that would help you to make those changes. So think a visual dashboard at distribution that allows you to update inventory and ship and pick lists right there on a screen that the people may be able to actuate or to use. The inability to have a handheld or a visual terminal that you walk around the shop floor with that tells you whether something is in inventory along those lines. You're telling me about impediments to being able to flow this correctly without using that tool email. So there's no way that we're going to replace emails completely. But to your point, I may be able to do something where the email might be structured in such a way that it goes to a more limited audience, that it always has an appropriate subject matter line, that we understand how to create priorities so that we're only looking at red priority before we start looking at yellow or green priority listings. There would be a variety of things like that. I don't know about your organization and how much those capabilities are there, but I think in many ways, if we think that we're struggling every day because we have to use that tool, then maybe there are other ways of simplifying how it is that we're using that tool, or we may have others within us. You know, you're right, Zoom is an overkill, but you know, I remember being out on a shipping floor and a pager worked. And you know, today nobody has a pager anymore, but boy, that was a real simple, direct way of getting a message to one or a group of people that needed to action something quite immediately. Frankly, sometimes you might look at, and when I was working with a company in Arkansas, we actually replaced the email with hourly stand-up meetings that took no more than 5 or 10 minutes out on the factory floor in each group. So somebody from order management would be present along with the manufacturing engineer and the shop floor supervisors. And there would be these short meetings that would take place in different departments on a cadence, which allowed them to maintain, you know, their hour by day charts and all the other work effort that they were going through, but allowed for rapid movement. But it wasn't an email. And one of the reasons why I got to be where I didn't care for email as much was that you may remember that in a message, there's really 3 parts to that message, right? There's the person creating and issuing the message. There's the message itself and the person receiving it. And if I shoot off an email, I can sit there and say, well, my job is done. I've done what I need to do. But if we don't know that the person receiving it has received it, understood it, and intends to action it, we may have fooled ourselves into thinking that we've actually accomplished something when all we've done is made ourselves feel better because we actually just sent out the note. Now, I don't know how that works in your organization, Steve, but you know, if you're in a worldwide...
That's right. My job is to put the, in this scenario, my job would be to try and get somebody else to do it, you know? Yeah. And the solution that we're trying to use more is pick up the phone. Just call one person. And if they don't answer, call somebody else. But you shoot an email out to 15 people and they all figure it's not their job to do it. So if you pick up the phone and call somebody, you can more easily direct that person, but at the risk of not getting to the next step and the next step and the next step that you need to get to. So it's a training issue also, because you've in this pile, you've also got new people that really don't know red, yellow, green yet. They just know somebody called them and they have to go do something.
So you have that aspect. The other aspect that's hard sometimes is I'm amazed at how many people don't know how to delegate their messages to somebody else while they're going to be away, or how many organizations don't have primary, secondary, and tertiary responsibles for a given activity. So if I can't reach Steve, I'm going to go to Dave. And if I can't reach Dave, I'm going to go to Terry. And that's how I ensure that something gets done, because at no time does our schedule really have it where all three of those people will be missing at any one given time. But that's hard to do. What I find is you may have it set up now, and all of a sudden Terry leaves to go to another organization, and nobody replaces her in that listing, so that the person who's trying to get something activated all of a sudden discovers that, well, I know who the primary is and who the secondary is, but those two people are gone. Who's the tertiary now? And that seems to be sometimes, missing in some of the different activities that are undertaken. Larry, John, Emma, Todd, or Terry, David, anybody have any other comments? Because I think what you raised there, Steve, is like every other business rule. There are always exceptions to the rule. And the key here is to make sure that we maintain the product flow and the customer satisfaction. And so you have times when you must use some of those tools that personally I would prefer that we not use very frequently. Emma, you've got your hand up.
Yes. Hi. Actually, I receive many emails every day, and some emails I only got CC'd, and for the same questions they can ask like in 10 different emails. So it's really difficult for me to track all the emails every day.
And you're not alone. Look, I'm retired now, and today I deleted 79 emails out of my personal email box. When I was working, I had maybe 150 or 200 emails, of which there may have only been 10 or 12 that I had to action something. So going back to what Steve said, there may have been 10 or 12 emails a day that said, Eric, please do something, or please look at this. And the rest I was being copied on for informational purposes. It was broadcast to a group, and the group was structured in such a broad way that I personally didn't have a great interest or a need to know, but I was part of that bigger distribution group, right? When somebody sends something out to all employees, all of us get to read something and we say, my goodness, I have nothing to do with this. Why am I even getting this at this point? So your frustration is well understood and appreciated. And remember that every time you look at an email, it may take you a minute, and then you've lost 10 or 15 seconds on either side of that email to get back to the work that you were working on at that time. So there's a couple of ways to address that, right? If you know that, one of the things I did was I structured email boxes, my inbox, to have automatic distribution to specific folders. In the Microsoft Outlook world, that would be a focused folder versus a other folder. But I could then take messages from my vendors or from customers and put them in specific folders, so that everything wasn't just sitting in my email, in the inbox, but rather it was distributed to appropriate things. So if I knew that my primary customer contact was reaching out to me, that would pop up in a specific folder. It wouldn't get lost in that other great big list of emails. And that's one tool that you might be able to use to organize and structure your items. And that can be done in Google Mail as well as in Microsoft Outlook. I don't know about other tools. Anybody else with comments? But Emma, I got to tell you, I'm happy I no longer have to deal with what you're going through right now.
Thank you.
It's funny. It's funny. You mentioned the big email box. There was a comment, you may have seen that. Somebody posted on LinkedIn the other day, humans are are not network routers. Just because it's possible for us to send and receive messages incessantly throughout our waking hours doesn't mean it's a sustainable way to exist. My 32,569 unread emails and I are feeling very bad.
32,569, that's a huge number. I can't imagine that.
Well, you know, that's probably only a couple of years.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, but it's nuts.
That's right. So there are other things that you can play with the net. Lexmark had a very strict 18-month data retention policy. I have my eldest daughter works for a company that has a 5-year retention policy. So they're only able to retain so much. What I can assure you of is if you've got 4 years worth of emails and you worked at a company like Lexmark with that tight of a policy, you wouldn't have that many emails left in there. And that's another problem that we have with email is the data retention policies of your organizations. We found that in one of the companies that I worked with, they were using group mailboxes in Gmail, and the corporation decided that they were only going to retain 12 months worth of detail. And all of a sudden, you're working on a project that's a 2 to 3 year project. Your group emails were gone for the prior periods, right? You just had the latest 12 months worth of information left behind. As a project manager, I would have been shocked by that method of maintaining the project detail because a project goes beyond what that particular retention policy would be. So that's one of the other areas and reasons why we need to think about things and why email, while it's become almost ubiquitous in many areas, is problematic. When I left Lexmark and retired, my manager got my email box. And he may have gotten the other 14 email boxes from other people who either went to other organizations or left the company as well. If you were the manager of a contracting organization like a TCS or a WePro or something of that nature, you might have had 40 or 50 people that reported to you for that. If they leave, you get all their email boxes. So I had a boss at one point, he had 240 email boxes merging into his email box as a transition for employees who had left the company because the project was done. I don't even know where you begin with that. I don't even know how you would search through that to be able to find anything that's relevant. Mm-hmm. And hence my pushing for integrated systems of record, as opposed to something like an email, which is a system of communication more than anything else. But having said that, I'm still sympathetic, Steve, with your need for that PC shipping and changing of stuff on the floor. So it's become more common. I'm sorry, Larry was going to say something there, Larry?
From a lean standpoint, I believe that you should manage email just like managing other projects and managing waste. Like meetings, for example, are typically a waste of time. Emails can be a waste. And I try to keep my business email to less than 1 page. So there's only maybe 30 emails in the inbox at any one time. And I say that, but at home I'm guilty. I check my email and I have 12,135 emails in my inbox. So I don't always.
Okay, so at work, I tried very hard to make sure that my inbox was cleared out completely by the end of the business week. At home, I try to do the same thing. Before this meeting started, I was down to 6 unread emails in my email box, but I have to be frank with you. I have about 40 that I have not filed in their appropriate folder yet. So, but the goal would be that you'd get down to your point. Can I see it on a single screen, what's left in my email box to be able to address? And the other thing I do, quite frankly, is I use the flagging capability and color scheme capabilities so that I know that items that I want to read and forward to a colleague, I may color a certain color and flag them as well. Mm-hmm. And that helps me organize, because then once I've done that, hit delete and they're gone.
Right, I try to keep them organized as well. One of the pet peeves I have is when you send out a mass email to 20, 30, 50, 100 people, and then many of those will respond with a reply all. And so here you get another huge amount of emails and so on. And another pet peeve I have, and I train people who I worked with in a very nice way. I call it coaching, right? How to handle email, basically email etiquette. And I tell them, I've seen emails where they bounce back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And if you go to print it, it may be 4, 5, 6 pages long. So my rule that I try to impose on people who work at least for me is that if you get an email, you can respond to it. They may respond back, but absolutely no more than 2 bounces back and forth. If it takes more than twice, really, if it takes more than once, pick up the phone, call the person rather than bounce emails back and forth.
So that's a great point. The other one that I worked a lot with people was if I'm on the copy line, no action is expected of me. If I'm on the to line, then the action is mine to take. So don't put 10 people on the to line. Put one person on the to line. They're the ones who are accountable for getting it done, and then everybody else could be copied on the lower part. But this kind of,
and very rarely would you put more than one person on the to line, because you can have 2, 3, 5 people doing the same thing, and then you have duplication of effort. Unless it's something like to these 3 people, you take care of this, you take care of that, and you handle this aspect of it, then it would be appropriate.
So one way to address that is if you had a group activity that had to be undertaken, is to create an email group. And so what was one of the tools that I've used as well. I have email groups, even in my volunteer world, right? So John Simpson sits on one of my KYCPE committees. He's part of an email group for that committee in particular. And then there's also one for the board of directors and so forth and so on, in order to be able to control that. And then that also has the benefit of not necessarily exposing everybody's email when you send it out, right? Because you're sending it out to that group. So, but
yeah, I mean, sometimes the feature of blind is good, blind copy, because first of all, they get the message, but they can't really respond.
I didn't think of it from a not able to respond perspective, but yeah, that would limit some of it. But maybe the best thing is to eliminate as much of this stuff as you possibly can. You don't want to have 32,596 emails in your inbox at some point. So let's see how we can get other ways of making things work. Visual boards, dashboards, other kinds of concepts that would flow things through. And again, to Steve's point and to Larry's point, there are times when you have to use it because it's the right tool for the right job, and you may not have a better way of actually getting that message across at that time. Any other questions?
It goes back to the original point, which was simplify. Emails, tools, technology, it allows us to talk at the speed of light. And as I used to talk about computers way back in the day, computers allow us to make mistakes at the speed of light. And you think we're talking about reply all and several other mistakes with email. And so we're able to make quick errors and respond quickly in the wrong way.
And I'm not sure that the ability to respond that quickly is a wonderful feature, right? I had an attorney one time who said that in his mind, so this is going back a ways, he said that the fax machine was the worst thing that ever happened to attorneys. It used to be the attorney would receive a letter from somebody complaining about something, I want to sue you, this, that, and the other thing, and they'd be able to read it, they'd discuss it, they'd write a letter back, it'd take a few days, the things get somewhat diffused. Then FedEx showed up. And all of a sudden, I'm going to overnight this to you, and you lost some of that deliberation time. But he said the bane of our existence was the fax machine, because now somebody says, I'm sending you a fax right now, and I expect an answer immediately. And of course, since then, we've moved on to SMS and smartphones and emails and all the other things that take away, that rob you of the ability to deliberate about some of these things. But on the other hand, they also provide us some benefit as well, right? So anybody else have anything else that they'd like to bring up tonight? I know that I sat here and said, get rid of emails as much as you possibly can. I still believe that, but I'll grant you that there are times when they are beneficial and that they're needed within an organizational structure.
Eric, this is Terry.
Yep.
The only thing I'll say is we have a lot of folks still working from home, and we've, you know, right now that's kind of key for us to have email. We do a lot of you know, link messaging back and forth as well, but that's kind of hard to get rid of email when you got people spread out everywhere.
Well, you may have a good point there. I know that when I was working with Lexmark, we used Microsoft Teams quite a bit, and that was a great chat capability and video call and all the other things as well. It had the additional benefit, though, of being able on the chats to keep the stream going in the individual channel that you were dealing with, right? So if I was doing architecture for one group, we'd have a channel and we could keep that going there. And it had the benefit that when I left, all that information is still there. Whereas in my email, it wouldn't be. So you may find that there would be other tools that you could use as well. But again, you have to have some way of making your organization as effective and efficient as it can be. And it may be that the only tool you have available to you today is email for that. It's just food for thought for the future as to how you might change and improve and simplify. So,
yes.
Oh, you know, an email, besides really notifying people of some special events, is to cover your ass sometimes.
I honestly never did that. Those fingers were crossed when I said that, right? We all know that we use that. And let's not forget the sending the email at 5 p.m. on Friday when you know the other person's already left the office, but you know, you actually got your report in. So yeah, we know about those games.
I'll tell you, I always got emails from the customer at 5 o'clock or phone calls, and they expected me to be there.
Absolutely, understood. So, all right, with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. Appreciate your joining us tonight. Great conversation, and I appreciate the learnings that I was able to get from you as a group tonight. Thank you very much. Have a great week and a good month.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
Thanks.
Thanks, Eric.
Bye.
Thanks.